On March 16, 2024, in an area of Monroe County, Florida, police stopped a vehicle after observing multiple traffic violations, including failing to stay in the lane, not using turn signals, and speeding. However, the situation quickly escalated when the driver, a 35-year-old woman, refused to comply with the officer's instructions and adopted a defiant attitude, leading to a prolonged and notable confrontation. The night had already descended upon Monroe County, draping the streets in an eerie silence, broken only by the distant hum of the occasional passing car. The streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to stretch across the empty roads. It was the kind of quiet evening that seemed to lull the town into a false sense of peace, a calm that hid the unpredictable nature of the night ahead. Then, suddenly, a bright red car tore through the stillness, its engine growling like a beast awakened from slumber. The car swerved recklessly across the lanes, its tires screeching in protest as it cut through the row, with alarming disregard for order. The sound of the engine seemed to claw through the air, loud and forceful, as if daring the world to notice. The driver showed no concern for the rules of the road, blatantly ignoring traffic signals that would have commanded any sensible driver to slow down and proceed with caution. There were no turn signals, no sign of any attempt to abide by basic traffic etiquette. It was as though the driver was above the law, a defiant streak of red against the dark backdrop of the county's dim streets. Behind the chaotic blur of the car's erratic path, a patrol car appeared, its lights flashing in a flurry of red and blue. The officer in the vehicle had been watching the entire scene unfold, his gaze trained on the reckless movements of the red car. He could feel the tension building in his chest, his instincts kicking in. This was a situation that, while routine, always had an edge of unpredictability. The officer exhaled slowly, his grip tightening around the wheel as his mind shifted into a state of focused preparedness. He had seen this before: drivers, intoxicated by their own sense of invincibility, expecting that no one would challenge their behavior. But tonight, the officer would not let it slide. As the patrol car pulled up behind the reckless driver, the officer turned off the siren, the quiet now heavy with expectation. He had no intention of rushing this encounter. There was a method to this procedure, a balance between calm authority and the need for control. He reached for his radio, checking in with dispatch before opening the door. The officer's steps were measured, careful, each one a testament to the experience he had in dealing with individuals who thought they could outrun responsibility. The red car, now idling in front of him, seemed to radiate defiance, as if daring him to approach. The officer took a deep breath, adjusting his uniform, and with a slow but deliberate pace, walked towards the driver's side door. Every move was calculated, not out of fear, but out of an understanding of the risks this job carried. His eyes never left the car, observing any subtle movements, any indication that the driver might try to flee or escalate the situation further. As he reached the door, the officer's hand hovered near his holstered weapon, a reflex built into years of training and experience. Every second counted, and he was prepared for whatever might come next. Before the officer could even speak, the car door swung open with surprising force, almost as if it had been flung open by the driver herself, signaling the arrival of someone who seemed utterly unconcerned with the situation at hand. The woman who emerged from the vehicle was in her mid-30s, a striking presence with blonde hair that cascaded down her shoulders in loose waves. It seemed almost unnatural, the way her hair shimmered under the dim glow of the streetlights, framing a face that exuded a mixture of confidence and challenge, as if she were accustomed to being the center of attention wherever she went. Her tight-fitting outfit, an outfit that clung to her frame with precision, looked more like something one might wear on a red carpet than during a late-night traffic stop. The sparkling high heels clicked sharply against the pavement as she stepped out, the sound echoing in the otherwise quiet night, adding an almost theatrical element to her entrance. The way she moved, so deliberate and posed, suggested that she was a woman used to getting what she wanted, with a presence that could intimidate or charm depending on her mood. "What's this about?" she demanded, her voice ringing out with an unmistakable edge of irritation. It was more than just a question, it was a challenge. The words tumbled from her lips, sharp and direct, as if she had little patience for what she clearly perceived as an inconvenience. Her tone was dismissive, but laced with a mixture of entitlement and defiance, as though she had already made up her mind that this encounter would be on her terms. She barely glanced at the officer, instead waving her hand with a nonchalant gesture that seemed to dismiss the entire situation, as though she were summoning him to explain himself, and her presence here was more of a curiosity and a concern. The officer, well practiced in handling encounters like this one, did not flinch. His face remained neutral, but there was a flicker of something more serious in his eyes. He had seen this behavior before: drivers who thought their status or appearance could somehow place them above the law, using charm or arrogance as a shield. But he wasn't fooled. He had a job to do, and no amount of confidence from the woman would change that. He kept his voice even and controlled, not allowing the woman's display of confidence to sway him. "Ma'am, please return to your vehicle immediately and place your hands on the steering wheel. This is for safety protocol," he said firmly. His words were simple, direct, but underscored by the weight of authority. The phrase "for safety protocol" was a standard response, one he had delivered countless times, but tonight, it felt heavier. There was a sense of tension in the air, a feeling that things could escalate quickly if not handled carefully. The officer's gaze remained steady, piercing, watching her every move. He had dealt with defiant drivers before, and he knew the importance of remaining calm and not engaging in the power struggle she seemed eager to initiate. But beneath his calm exterior, he was processing the situation with precision. Her body language, her tone, the way she carried herself. She wasn't just angry, she was trying to control the encounter. And the officer understood that sometimes, control wasn't just about asserting authority, it was about maintaining it through every action, every word, and every pause. As he stood there, waiting for her to make a choice, the night around them seemed to freeze. The quiet of Monroe County, interrupted only by the tense back and forth, seemed to hang in the air like a standoff in slow motion. Every second stretched longer than it should have. Would she comply, or was this going to become another battle of wills? The officer knew that the next few moments would determine the course of the interaction and perhaps even his own safety. Instead of cooperating, the woman crossed her arms and stared at him, as if evaluating his worth. She smirked a smug, self-assured smile and retorted, "Do you know who I am? I have the right to know why I'm being stopped. Who do you think you are to give me orders like this?" The officer, refraining from engaging in her provocation, took a small step back to maintain a safe distance and repeated with a firmer tone, "This is not a debate. Please return to your vehicle right now." The woman, as though performing in a dramatic film, shook her head slowly and flipped her hair intentionally. "I haven't done anything wrong. What do you want? Write me a ticket if you must. I have things to do." The patrol car's flashing lights illuminated the scene, amplifying both the tension and absurdity of the situation. The officer, his patience honed by years of experience, kept his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed a growing alertness. He could tell that this was not going to be a straightforward conversation, especially with someone who seemed determined to play the starring role in her own tale of self-righteousness. The woman stood there, showing no signs of worrying. On the contrary, she seemed to be in control of the situation. With one hand resting on her hip and the other gesturing dramatically as she spoke, she looked the officer straight in the eye and began her own line of questioning. "How long have you been working here?" she asked, her tone laced with condescension. "You look like one of those fresh out of training cops. Are you sure you understand the rules?" She smirked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let me tell you something. I know the law, and I haven't done anything wrong." The officer, maintaining his professional demeanor, responded with a calm and steady voice, "Mom, this isn't about how long I've been working. I need you to return to your vehicle immediately. This is your final warning." But the warning seemed to fall on deaf ears. The woman didn't budge. She raised her hand in a gesture as if teaching him, and continued, "You have no idea who you're talking to, do you? I'm a mother of 3, and I have rights. Do you hear me? Rights?" The officer took a deep breath. In that moment, he couldn't help but feel like a high school teacher facing the most unruly student in class. But this was no classroom, and her actions clearly went beyond mere non-cooperation. "Return to your vehicle, place your hands behind your head, and cooperate with us right now," he repeated, his voice firmer and more resolute, his gaze sharp like his words. Instead of stepping back, the woman took a small step forward, the sound of her high heels clicking against the pavement. She nodded as if she had just made a major discovery. "You really think you have the right to make me do all this?" she asked, her tone almost mocking. "You should know I'm calling my lawyer right now." The officer patiently checked his wristwatch, his lips pressed into a thin line. The situation was getting more complicated than he'd anticipated. It was clear she had no intention of cooperating, and her attitude was increasingly revealing that this wasn't a matter of the law, it was a matter of her oversized ego. "You're making things more difficult for yourself," he said, his tone trying to snap her out of the role she seemed to be playing. But the fire in her eyes told him that this performance was far from over. As the dialogue continued, a new detail began to emerge. As the night breeze swept by, the officer noticed a faint smell of alcohol wafting from the woman who was loudly defending her rights. "I'm not drunk," she suddenly declared, as though reading the officer's thoughts. Her voice was a little louder than usual, with a hint of something off, like someone trying to maintain control, but unable to fully hide their inner turmoil. The officer observed her carefully with a cautious gaze. He wasn't just listening to her words. He was watching her actions, her hands flailing excessively at times, then gripping the car door for bounds. Her eyes were a little bleary, but still glinted with defiance mixed with some confusion. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, his tone neutral but loaded with implication. "Of course," she responded, spreading her arms wide as though convincing an invisible audience. "If you want, I'm happy to blow into that thing. What's it called again? Breathalyzer, right? I'll prove I'm perfectly fine." She scoffed, but the laugh did little to mask the disarray in her speech. Her words were starting to show signs of incoherence, repeating unnecessary details. Meanwhile, the officer kept noting the signs. It wasn't just the smell of alcohol, but her unsteady stance, the way she avoided eye contact whenever he brought up the issue of cooperation. Every movement she made seemed to tell a story that contradicted her claim of being perfectly fine. "I don't need a machine to see what's going on here," he said, still keeping his composure. "We'll take this step by step." The woman interrupted him again, emphasizing, "You're wasting my time. I've told you, I'm fine. Go ahead and test me. I'm ready." The officer knew that her insistence wasn't proof of her innocence. On the contrary, it was often a clear sign of someone trying to hide the truth. But instead of arguing further, he allowed her to step into the testing phase, where undeniable behaviors would speak for themselves. After several requests for cooperation that went unheeded, the situation began to escalate. The officer, still maintaining an astonishing level of composure, informed the woman that she was being arrested for obstruction and suspected driving under the influence. The woman, now seeming to realize the gravity of the situation, suddenly changed her tactics. "You can't arrest me. I'm the mother of 3 children," she yelled, her tone mixing anger and panic. The officer remained professional, but his patience was beginning to wear thin. "Being a mother does not excuse breaking the law," he replied succinctly, his words carrying weight. She wasn't going to give up easily. As the officer moved to cuff her, she began to struggle, her legs unsteady, as though she wanted to step back but had nowhere to go. "Wait, I can pay bail right here. How much? Just tell me the amount," she pleaded, her voice desperate, but still tinged with defiance. Bystanders began to take notice. The headlights of cars flickered on, engines stopped, and the gazes of people on the sidewalk only made her more agitated. "I don't deserve this. This is abuse of power," she screamed. Yet, the officer remained calm, quickly and decisively putting the cuffs on her. "When my people see this video, you'll regret this," she continued to shout, trying to rally an invisible crowd of supporters. But instead of receiving sympathy, she was met with curious glances and headshakes from a distance. Just when it seemed the situation was under control, a man stormed up from afar. He was the woman's boyfriend, a self-proclaimed hero coming to rescue justice. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, crossing the safety boundary the officer had established. Wearing a t-shirt emblazoned with the words "Model Citizen," he stood in front of the officer and the detained car as if ready to lead a protest. "Do you know what you're doing? This is my woman. You have no right to arrest her." He pointed aggressively at the officer, his eyes challenging the entire justice system. The officer remained composed and simply asked, "Are you a lawyer?" "No. But I'm a taxpayer, and I have the right to know everything," he retorted proudly, his eyes gleaming as if he had just found a trump card to win the debate. He continued with a barrage of questions. "Why arrest her? What's the legal basis? Do you even know who she is?" But none of his questions were answered to his satisfaction by the officer, who was focused on maintaining safety and controlling the situation. Not stopping there, he declared, "We'll sue you. Just wait, I'm going to film this and make you famous." He pulled out his phone, started recording, and even demanded that the officer pose for the footage, as though preparing for the documentary he intended to make. Though his actions seemed more like a farce than a serious protest, he stood in the middle of the road, blocking the way and making the situation even more tense. But the officer didn't let himself be provoked. He simply reminded him, "You're obstructing my work. Please step back, or I will have to arrest you." However, the boyfriend just sneered, crossing his arms and standing firm as though challenging him. "I want to see you try," he taunted. But instead of waiting for the result, his actions only made both of them the target of ridicule that night. Just when it seemed the confrontation was nearing its end, the boyfriend unexpectedly moved from words to action. Ignoring the officer's warning, he walked straight toward the car, opened the door, and began rummaging through the inside. One of the officers quickly moved in, his voice firm. "Stop right there. You're not allowed to touch this vehicle." But instead of complying, the boyfriend turned back with a defiant look on his face. "What are you scared of? I'm just taking my stuff." His movements, though not directly threatening, were full of arrogance, as though testing the limits of law enforcement's patience. The officer emphasized, "This is seized property. You're breaking the law. Step back now." However, the man didn't retreat. Instead, he raised his voice in defiance. "You're threatening me. What's the big deal? I have the right to take my stuff." While he remained stubborn, the officer had to stay alert, his hand hovering near his holster, eyes carefully tracking every movement of the man. With each step closer the boyfriend took, the tension in the air grew, like a rope stretched to its limit. When blocked, the couple seemed to decide that the best way to deal with law enforcement was through verbal assault. Both began mocking the officers in unison. "Is this who we pay to protect us?" The boyfriend sneered, his voice full of contempt. "You don't even know how to do your job right." He crossed his arms, his expression smug as if he'd made an irrefutable argument. The woman, still sitting in the police car with her wrists cuffed, tried to add her own taunts. "He's not even man enough to face me," she shouted, as if to assert her moral superiority, even in the face of arrest. The boyfriend continued with more bravado, "I swear I'll make a documentary to expose all of you. Just wait, I have thousands of followers on social media, and they'll know just how incompetent you are." One officer looked at him with a blank expression, calmly responding, "If you don't leave here right now, I will have to arrest you for obstructing justice." But instead of quieting down, the boyfriend pushed back, "Arrest me then. I'm filming. We'll make you famous." Despite the couple's last-ditch efforts, the officers remained determined to follow procedure. A tow truck arrived, and their car was hauled away amidst the angry shouting from the boyfriend. "I'm suing you. I'll take this to the press," he yelled, his eyes filled with fury, as though betrayed by the entire legal system. The woman, from inside the police car, also refused to be quiet. "Don't let them do this to us. Call the lawyer right now." But her words only made the situation more absurd, not because she lacked an argument, but because she clearly didn't understand the severity of her actions. Meanwhile, the officers swiftly completed their work and left the scene, leaving the boyfriend standing there, phone in hand, unsure of what to do next. As the police car disappeared from view, a passerby chuckled softly, "If they really make a documentary, they should call it The Arrogant Ones versus the Law." In the end, no matter how much the couple yelled, resisted, or even threatened to make a documentary, they couldn't change the fact that the law is fair and just. Their arrogant words only highlighted their ignorance and inflated egos, turning them into the laughingstock of the situation instead of earning respect. The clear lesson from this story is, when facing the law, cooperation and respect are always the shortest path to resolving the issue. Resistance only complicates matters further and exposes one's immaturity. In life, sometimes knowing when to step back and respect the rules is the best way to move forward.